Good afternoon. I'm particularly touched to be able to speak to you in the memory of Jean-Paul Lemond on a topic that is very dear to me and which Jean-Paul also had a keen interest. My activity is mostly concerned with the natural world, and but I also keep an eye on what's going on in robotics very often, and I hope that some of my findings will have some echo in the robotics activities. What I would like to emphasize is that, of course, all animals have a keen sense of touch. It's not limited to extremities. You know, the entire body is sensitive, and there are many ways actually animals take advantage of touch. It could be whiskers, it could be scales, it could be hoofs, etc., etc. But here we'll focus on the soft extremities, which are very often an attribute of mammals. And so that's an example here, but many mammals have soft extremities, which are particularly interesting, of course, in terms of tactile mechanics. So the first question I'm asking is that, of course, touch is a computational problem. It's a problem that robots or brains have to solve in order to be able to take advantage of sensory data. And this problem was of course, looked very carefully in the visual world. There is a well-known way of expressing or framing, if you want, the space in which visual computation takes place, and it's called a plenoptic function, which means essentially it's an abstract function which embodies anything that can be seen. And of course, real robots or real animals only have access to a subset of that space. Like a camera would have access to a two-dimensional image. But in general, in vision, the plenoptic function has 7 dimensions, which are readily deduced from the way photons behave. So the question in touch, what would be the equivalent? And so this question can be framed in terms of solid bodies that interact, like A and B here. And when you have a tactile interaction, then they, in general, undergo deformation. And then here we can assume that the body B has some sensing capability, so it's able to tell something about its own state change. The trouble is that actually, because of the way continuum mechanics are made, the configuration of the bodies A and B are by nature infinite dimensional. So there's and essentially the deformation of these bodies are captured by an infinite number of trajectories, which I've labeled here A and B, small a and small b, which establish this plane haptic function, means everything that could be felt in principle. And of course, the robots or the brain's problem is to guess something about A, like whether it's slippery or sticky, or is it soft or hard, or rough or smooth, and from a very small subset of B, of course, which are essentially the set of mechanoreceptors that are embedded in our body. And of course, this problem is in some way analogous to the problems in audition and in vision, but acquires a particular nature in the mechanical domain because of this intrinsic infinite dimensional space in which it occurs. So I won't go into any development for, but I'll give some examples, one theoretical and then one experimental of manifestation of this idea. Well, before doing this, I'll mention in passing that, of course, it's not very well known, but like in audition and vision, there are lots and lots of tactile illusions that are really fun to expose. And here there's a reference to an article maybe you might consult, which gives some hint on how to actually make them at home. Of course, there are, since then, actually, there are many more which have been discovered, and they are just as interesting and intriguing as visual illusions. Where does sensation comes from? So we've already outlined, it comes from the fact that when we touch things, our own body deforms as a result of the interaction with another or several. And so here's a very simplified example, essentially a finger which is sliding on a glass surface, and then we've recorded actually, if you want, using an imaging system, what could be these deformation trajectories. And as you can observe, they are nothing but simple, but they do have some characteristic patterns, which you can see actually the periphery of the sliding surface slide before the central region, and then there's a dynamic which is both a function of the materials in contact, which is the skin against the glass, and the movement that you do. Here's another example. It's the same technique, but here the finger moves in sort of more arbitrary manners, and then you can see that there's a different, very different set of trajectories. But what is mostly intriguing is that actually, if you do that on your telephone, you will essentially experience consciously two main sensations. One is related to shape. You will have a very keen experience that actually the surface of your telephone is flat. And the second is that actually it's made of glass. And I can assure you it's partly due to the thermal property, but it's mostly due actually to your brain's interpreting these deformations as being characteristic to glass. And of course, you can extrapolate that this idea can be extended to many other examples or many other situations. This is like a theoretical development on how actually processing could be done. And the idea actually is inspired from vision. Essentially, in vision, it's known that actually an important early processing in visual systems is actually to detect zero crossings in the Laplacian of the illumination, and we thought there might be something similar in touch. And here we have an example. Say you have a coin that you hold in your finger on the upper left corner of the slide. And then if you compute the shear, which is actually the components of the deformation tensor of diagonal components, you see that actually something interesting happens. The shear is as a positive value on one side of the coin and negative value on the other, and it goes to 0 when the coin actually touch. And you have something similar, say you have a pin pushing on your skin. And the idea here is actually that maybe it's something due to, it could be due to actually the properties of the peripheral nervous system, or maybe it be higher order computation. But it could very well be that actually detecting 0 shear is a way of detecting edges. And what we have shown in the paper, it is actually robust to uncertainty in the same manner as early vision edge detection is to illumination and scale. But here there is no notion of scale. Of course, there is no notion of illumination, but there is a notion of actually how hard a object is pushing in your skin, and of course you can immediately experience that if you have an object in your hand and you feel an edge on it. The edge is present regardless on how much you push, and you might really well actually modify the deformation pattern in magnitude by 2 orders of magnitude without even realizing it. So this process is analogously robust to this perturbation, but many others as well. Here is a experimental example. What you are seeing here is actually small specks you see on the screen. Is a high resolution imaging on something called the true contact between a figure and here again glass, and the true contact basically betrays what part of your skin is actually in very close proximity to the glass. And you can see it's very small. You can hardly see it, but if you wait a little, you can see that actually it grows through time. And after a number of seconds, then actually the true contact area becomes your fingerprint. But it took a long time. And so that process is actually explained by the fact that water diffuses from your body and then gets trapped in the interstitial space between your finger and the glass, and then the force of adhesions and friction vary at the same time, which is quite amazing because you've probably never realized it. But if you remove your finger from the glass, then the water will evaporate, and then the finger will come back to a more dry state. And this process is a combination of chemistry going on, a phase transition actually going on in your superficial layer of skin, and then interaction with water. And then so the so this is reported. If you're interested, you can look up it in this article. But to make it, to drive the point is that we've actually performed the same measurement with an elastomer surface which is actually softer than your skin, because when your skin is dry, it's actually very stiff. And then when it's wet, it actually loses its stiffness by something like 3 orders of magnitude. So it's not very something negligible at all. And you can see that actually if you touch an elastomer, then the friction is immediately established, whereas for glass, it will take, as we've seen, 10 to 20 seconds before reaching the asymptotic value. And this can be actually seen as a super incredibly useful source of tactile information when you manipulate or you hold objects and you have to tell what they're made of. If it was paper, for example, paper is porous, and the process would be completely different because the water would actually diffuse inside the paper, and then the process would be extremely slowed down, and that will actually tell you that it's paper. And the speed at which it does that is actually a characteristic of the type of porosity that the object has. It could be wood, it could be all kind of common materials which will drive that process. So we have seen two examples here. The first was this incredibly rich pattern of deformation when the finger slides on glass, and the second is this incredibly large variations of contact mechanics when you touch different type of materials. So these are only two examples. I've spent the past 20 years collecting all kind of other examples of if you want, mechanical phenomena that are relevant to touch. But the main point here is that I would like to mention that actually often it's said that the skin is like the retina, and that's really a misconception. The retina, as you know, is actually a really elaborate neural net. It has neural layers that perform early processing, and that would be completely, and what they do is really break down the image into bits that are understandable to the rest of the brain. And that process in touch is carried out not in the skin, of course, because that would be probably impractical. It's carried in a nucleus, which is at the top of your spine in a brainstem. And numbers that are quoted here actually refer to a small animal. So if you are talking about a big animal like us, then you can add 1 or 2 zeros to all to these numbers. And the most intriguing part of this nucleus is that it's been identified in fossil records since the Triassic period. So it's a very old brain structure, which is shared by all vertebrates. A little bit like the retina is essentially shared by all vertebrates. And so it's a particularly intriguing piece of neural machinery, which actually makes your tactile system works. So we can look a little bit the way it's made. Essentially, it's made of a large set of cells, of course. We'll look into the architecture a little later, but there are essentially a layer of output cells, which is shown here. It's actually a real image. And what these output cells receive are inputs from the skin, of course. But contrary to what is often assumed, it's a very different type of architecture, actually. All the inputs for a single cells arise from very large regions of the skin. It could be by extrapolation from small animal in a human. It could be one cell would actually receive inputs from the whole fingertip. And so the difference is that actually you will have many, of course, of these cells, and they will have, of course, many synaptic waves. And what we've been able to show is that they perform a really crucial type of computation that is if you want, in some abstract way, analogous to the work that the retina does in vision. It's made like that, essentially. Primary afferents enter from from the bottom, and then they project into this really essentially in a human that would be 1 million cells, output cells. So what we've been able to show is that actually if we drive actually the tactile system with different type of stimuli which differ in terms of their temporal or the spatial characteristics, then these different cuneate neurons are actually not tuned. That's what we were hopeful, but it didn't happen. They were not tuned at all to a specific stimulus, but what they could do actually is actually separate them apart, and that's really the key point. Actually, they can separate these very small differences in spatial and temporal characteristics of input patterns. So this is essentially the table that shows that actually instead of being, if you want, clustered in sort of specific places, these cells actually occupy the entire tactile space as uniformly as possible, and that's really the lesson here. So the neural circuitry essentially is a bit like that. You have afferent inputs from the, which are shown here in red, green, and blue, and they have excitatory inputs on the output neurons, but there are also interneurons which have inhibitory action, both from other neurons and from the inputs. And the whole thing actually, so as I said, you have to imagine that you are looking here at millions. You have a really interesting neural machinery, which nature has invented since the Triassic period to process tactile inputs. And what it can be said immediately is that it's very different, of course, from the neural machinery that makes audition work or vision work. So I'm glad to report that I will be spending the next 3 years to look into this tactile mechanics plus neural circuitry in detail, and developed, if you want, a model of how that can be working, and I'm hoping that the result will have some impact on the robotics community. And with that, I will stop, and then because I'm not able to, unfortunately, be there and present, I will be very glad to answer questions by email. Thank you very much.